Welcome to Life by Design for Chiropractors, episode 48.
Welcome to Life by Design, the podcast for chiropractors. Here's your host, Dr. Jamie Richards.
Welcome to Life by Design, the podcast for chiropractors. I'm your host, Dr. Jamie Richards. Bring back my pal, Dr. Mike Gibson today, and we're talking about the three most overlooked situations you need to master in order to stop people from quitting care. There's lots of places along your lifetime care map that are very important, that you have a process and a skill set that is connected to that, often overlooked, of course, but there's three very specific places that if you're not implementing a specific strategy, then you're losing the potential to impact people and to have them continue down that path. We're also going to make sure that you get the other 7 by hosting a freebie. That's going to be a webinar coming up August the 10th, guys, 8 p.m. You'll see the registration in the show notes. We limit that. There's only 100 people that can fit on our platform. We always go over and we don't do replays. So make sure that you take advantage. Click that button and jump on there to get the other 7. We'll recap the first 3 as well. That's August the 10th. 8 p.m. Hope to see you there and enjoy today's episode of Life by Design for Chiropractors, the voice of reason in chiropractic. Mike Gibson, welcome back to Life by Design for Chiropractors.
Thanks, Jamie. Always great to be here.
Yeah, it is great to be here. We've been talking a lot about sales lately, Mike. It's a big thing. I know we're going to be doing this soon in our live event. And we've, tied a lot of our concepts around this idea of sales and how sales is very, very important. It's an overlooked process that a lot of chiropractors don't have in their business for lots of different reasons, which we've covered at length on previous podcasts. The end point that we want to make, and this, I just can't reinforce this enough, but selling is good. Selling, I feel like I should just be like a robot. Selling is good. Selling is good. You need to sell in your business and in your life, in that case, to get what you want. And it's not done in a manipulative way. It's also to get the prospective patient what they want. It's that future benefit that's good for them. And that's the win-win situation that we're talking about. So you have to have a sales process in place. It needs to be something that's organized, systematized. We're going to go deeper today. We're going to look at this from a different perspective, and we're going to cover, some of the main places where selling is important. There's so many in your lifetime care map, but there's some overlooked places that could cost you a lot if you don't think about what it is that you're trying to do, what your objectives are, and have a strategy in place. So that's what we're going to cover today, Mike. Before I get into that, and I know I've got tons of questions for you. This is a great area where you're really, really strong. So we're going to have a great interaction, good conversation today. But just as a basic reminder, almost template, we come back to this over and over. What we're trying to create here, guys, is this retention-based practice. How does that differ from what most people experience or what you might call a conventional, maybe a traditional practice? It's different because people are staying. And, I hear a lot of doctors, Mike, I know you coach with a lot of clients too. How often do you hear somebody tell you their retention's good until they actually fill out the success surveillance system and send that over to you, and you start looking at this thinking, I thought they said the retention was good.
I think they come to the realization even before they send it. But you're right. I think 9 out of 10 times, someone either purchases the SSS, the success surveillance system, or we've given it to them as a new client, and I think everything's going to be good, but this will be great just for us to keep a little bit better track. And then, sure enough, as soon as their staff has inputted all the data, I get the email like, oh man, we got to talk.
Yeah, it's amazing, right? Because there's that impending doom and gloom that they recognize is now happening when they get a good dose of reality. And, reality obviously exists. So avoiding this doesn't help you. I've had offices, and I mean good offices, that I would consider really great people, great doctors. And just because the systems aren't in place, I've seen cases where up to 30 and 40% of their new patients over the past 2 years are inactive. 30 to 40% are inactive. And I mean, when you see those numbers, you recognize that thankfully in their case, there's a stream of new people coming in on the front end, which is what you tend to see in a more traditional office. at least the dependence on that. And I guess that's where a lot of the stress comes from in practice, because you know that on the back end, people aren't going to stay. You need that people coming in on the front end. And you can see the slippery slope here. I know you handle a lot of the marketing consultations and a lot of the marketing coaching. So I'm sure you see this where people have new people, but that's where they're stressed and they start to almost deteriorate their brand because they're so dependent on new people showing up.
Well, and that's it. And for anyone who's listened long enough, you know that our brand of marketing is really, we play the long game. We use brand building, relationship building, authority building type marketing that in the long term is going to create that steady flow of not just new people, but really pre-qualified, high quality new people. And so you're right. I get into these conversations with docs, especially ones who are, we're just starting to work together and like, okay, Mike, I get all that. That's what I want. I want that. But right now, we've only had 2 new people this month. What can you give me right now to bridge that gap, because we're having a really slow month, and this dichotomy that goes back and forth. But you're right. At the end of the day, it's you've got to build that retention, or else you just keep on that hamster wheel going around and around and around, and it's stressful.
It is stressful, and it's it just makes me think of I'm sure with the CrossFit 613 and the Fit Club, and I want to lose 20 pounds over the next couple of years, but I'd like to lose 18 tomorrow.
Yeah.
What do you have for me that can give me the first 18, and then I'm good. I'll go into the long game from there. But I just need to get that first 18 under my belt, and it just doesn't work that way. And so this retention-based practice is really about high conversion on the front end, pre-qualified new people staying for a lifetime, low stress compared to this need for new people on the front end. We're losing people on the back end. Oftentimes care is being given away, discounted care. So, when we think about how this gets mapped out, we like to actually define that, and that's what we call the lifetime care map. I think we've given that out before, Mike, somewhere along the way, and it gives people a chance to really start to identify what are the touch points from point A to Z in your practice. And you want to build a lifetime practice, but are you actually considering what that looks like? And I know in a lot of cases, it's just like most of the practice. It's people come in, not really sure what's happening. Yeah, we maybe have a day 1 and day 2 in place that works to some degree, but then from there, it's kind of like a crapshoot. And of course, people aren't going to stay for a lifetime because you don't really know what those touch points are. So there's a bunch of them along the way in the lifetime care map, all your different stages of care, the deliverables that you need to map out during that time frame, where your feedback cycles are, where the most important components lie, where your workshops are, all the different things you do. So I think mapping that out is very, very valuable. And there's, we've identified, 10 major areas where you need to sell. And of course, selling isn't an all the time, always type thing, but, identified 10 specific areas where selling and getting people to say yes is really, really important. But for today, Mike, we're going to talk about 3 that are overlooked. And I think if I said to people, all right, tell me the most important places, obviously they're going to say day 1, day 2, examinations. And of course, those are very, very important, but you already know that. And you may not have the pieces in place, but you know that those are important. Let's talk today about the 3 that are completely overlooked, that in most cases, they're almost looked at as secondary or tertiary. There's not really a framework that exists around them. And you could almost make the case that many of these are as important as your day 1 and day 2. So why don't we start with number 1, Mike, the first phone call. What are your thoughts about the first phone call, why it's important, and what we need to do in order to get the yes and to move into the next step?
Well, and when we started to discuss, these 10 points of your process that really require an important sales strategy. This is one that came to mind, right away for me, simply because it's real in my office right now, where we have a relatively new team member, and I've heard her a couple times in the last several weeks, answering questions for prospective new patients who have called in, and a lot of cringing is going on. So I know for me, this is an area where we do have a system in place, but it's that second piece of it, which is a little bit of a tangent, but I think important, is that it's not only just important to create a system, but it's also important to train both yourself and, in this case, as as reflects the first call, really taking a lot of time to train your team on it. So I think that's super important. But I think more than anything, I think the message that I'm sharing with my team is that when someone calls in, when someone makes that first call and has taken that step, really just don't screw it up, right? If they've made the call, they've picked up the phone, they dialed the number, they're ready to go, right? So it's really just having a good system in place and making sure that you don't screw it up. And I think that's really just the really important to understand when creating your system, that they've already bought to some degree. They've already bought the idea of starting the process or having that first conversation. So just don't screw it up. That's advice number one.
Yeah, and when people contact us, there's a couple different situations in which they do contact us. And, if you're doing things, and obviously if you're working with Mike, hopefully these people are pre-qualified. So when they do call in, they're very much, ready to go. And you definitely don't want to screw it up. But in some instances, it's maybe not quite that clean. You have people calling in who, maybe they're very, very cold, or they don't know a lot about your practice. Maybe they were referred in, but still weren't told a lot. So in that case, you need to sell them into this next step. And you need to have communication strategies in place in order to do that. So, a couple key points here for this sales situation. Number one, don't disqualify them. Don't say stuff that potentially could get them to not say yes. And there's all kinds of things that fall into that category, and I'm sure we could brainstorm what they are. For the most part, don't answer questions, right? Don't be telling them all kinds of different things about your practice. Don't be, telling them, what's going to happen beyond the basic fundamental steps. So, I think it's really, really important, number one, that we don't disqualify them. The second part is to understand where they are in the process, right? You're talking about creating a lifetime practice member. You don't create a lifetime practice member on the first phone call, or, in today's online marketing could be the first email. That's not where this is going to happen. Now, the opposite is going back to number one, you can actually stop them from becoming a lifetime practice member on this phone call or on this email. So know where they are. Your only objective, and I think this is a general principle across all of these, Mike, and across the 10 and across, when we get into the playbook we've been talking about, knowing what the objective is. And the objective in this case is simply to get them to say yes to the next step, which in this particular instance is yes to a case review. So, making sure that what you're saying is simply just guiding them down the path, and the logical answer is a yes. And then that leads me to number 3, Mike. Maybe talk a bit about this, because I think this is a big mistake that a lot of teams make, a lot of staff make. All of a sudden, you're in this process and the person on the phone starts asking all kinds of questions. Am I going to get adjusted this day? Do you take x-rays? What do you tell your team in terms of what should they answer, what should they not answer?
Well, it's going to depend a lot on your process, but I think, I've heard a lot, Jamie, and you can tell me if you've heard the same, but I've heard a lot of different people advise that when that first person calls, that you want to tell them about, and some people even go as far as booking the second appointment already, at the first visit. And I think that's a mistake. And the reason I do is because people don't have context for the next step. Right? They have you use the example of lifetime care. They, of course, have no context for that when they're first stepping into your office unless they've been referred. But let's just take the average practice member who's new and has found you online or what have you. They have no context for what they're getting themselves into. And likely they have all these preconceived ideas and myths about what to expect in your office. And so, not only are you battling against those, but they don't understand what the next step may be. All they want to do is, okay, have the question answered. Is this the place for me? Should I be here? Right? And so even going so far as, explain to them what's going to happen after their first visit, I think is a mistake, because they just don't have any context for that. So, as far as exactly what questions should be answered by the team, well, it's any questions that are specific to the appointment. But I know because I've trained for years and years with my team. A lot of the most common questions is that someone calls and they may not be someone like I was mentioning who's already decided that okay, I'm in, right? They're still a little bit on the fence and they want to know, can the doctor help me, right? So the answer is like, I have no idea. And that should be that should be the answer, whether you are the doctor or the staff. The staff,
Right,
of course,
yeah.
that's an obvious
Good point.
answer. But
Right.
the doc shouldn't have an answer. I have no idea. First of all, I have no idea. I don't know the details of this case. And I'd have to do a thorough examination to determine whether or not, or as we always say, what's the core problem here? Is it in your spine and nervous system? Then yeah, I'll be able to help. But I can't know that even from a history many times. So my point being here is that don't answer questions that you don't have true answers. Don't just kind of give like, well, maybe this, maybe that. Just answer the questions that are specific to booking that first appointment. Right. If you're a staff member and someone starts to ask questions that are clinical in nature, those are of course the easy ones. Listen, that's really a question that the doctor needs to answer. During your consult, you're going to have the opportunity to ask as many questions like that. Mm-hmm. They'll have an answer for you. So the goal here, and again, this comes back to what you said, which is really the most important. What's the objective here? What's the objective of this of you being on this phone call? It's just to book that first consult. That's it. And really, any questions beyond that should really be answered by, I'm really not sure. That's a great question for the doctor. He'll be able to answer that question. Any others that you have, when you're here for your consult. Would you prefer tomorrow or Friday?
Yeah, no, I think that's great, Mike. And like many of the things we talk about on the show, I have made that mistake as well. So you can add that to the list. In my trial and error of testing basically everything out that could be done in a chiropractic practice, I have booked the second visit. I've done everything, as people know, and that didn't work that well for us. I didn't like that process. So I agree with you 100%. Just get the yes, get them into the case review, let them know that if a examination is warranted and the doctor feels like an examination is the next step and they'd like to go into that, then explain that can happen on that day. But other than that, that's as far as we take it. And I just heard my staff literally 2 days ago answer these questions, and I heard her on the phone say, those are great questions. Those are the types of questions that you'll be able to ask in your case review, and the doctor can answer that question for you. And guess what? That new person is scheduled, and they're probably curious, which is a great mindset to have somebody come in that state. So the second piece that totally goes overlooked, we've actually done a whole podcast on this episode, Mike. So if you go back to episode 15, guys, you can actually listen to the entire podcast. But we're going to break it down in specifically in the context of selling on this visit. And that's the daily visit. This is so overlooked, when I've done the calculations, because I was curious pre-episode 15, how much time proportionally do we spend with the patient? And it's, if you have a practice where you're retaining people, it's by far, even if you're spending 2 to 4 minutes with somebody, it's by far the daily visit. And yet that's the visit that goes completely overlooked, Mike. So I know you're always in the process of training associate doctors, as are we. You put together a nice template. Why don't you walk us through the template so you can give the docs here listening a sales process that they can use on the daily visits?
Yeah, for sure. First, though, I think the mentality here, and I think why it gets overlooked, is because we've always traditionally in chiropractic put so much emphasis on day one and day two, and that conversion on day two, even getting agreements if you're going that far, hopefully on day two, and then it's kind of like, you just kind of like, done, the sales process is done. They're in, on to the next new person, and actually that's a whole nother point, but that's oftentimes feedback that different patients have given for different docs, is that they feel really special. I think Bill Estep was one who really kind of pioneered this thought process, and I think it's brilliant, is that we put so much emphasis on day one, day two, these longer visits, all this attention, and then as soon as they've committed to the care, it's almost like they become second rate, and you kind of push them aside, and you put all your focus and all your energy back on the on the day one, day two, on the next new person that's coming in. And of course, and again, we've talked at length about this, about the retention-based practice, et cetera, et cetera. But Jamie, I think you're absolutely correct in saying that for most of us, we totally ignore the fact that we need to have a system and a strategy for every visit. A template that I'll share with you in a moment that we've called the perfect visit template. But we really, really need to understand that what you're doing and the objective for the daily visit is to sell them on the next visit. Even if you've got an agreement up front, you still, the sales process does not end, right? You need to continue that every single visit. I think you need to have the mentality that I need to, be in sales mode here to make sure that they are going to show up for their next visit. right? It doesn't have to be this long-winded strategy. I mean, this is very quick. I mean, and we have as you guys know, I practice in a high volume type model. And so, I don't have a lot of time. So this template has to be quick, succinct, but it has to accomplish that objective where we are selling them on that next visit. So I put together this 5-step process, and there's lots of details. And again, I don't want to get too much in this, but if you're interested in more details, go back to episode 15. I think it was called The Anatomy of the Perfect Office Visit. But very quickly, here's the template that we put together. Number one is you've got to, connect. You to connect with that person, make eye contact, connect with them on a personal level. I think one of the reasons that I've always, one of many reasons I've had good retention over the years, or great retention, is because I have a really good memory for things that I talk about with my practice members. So being able to connect with those things, they were just on a holiday or what have you, there's a slippery slope here and getting off track and, having this long-winded conversation while you've got a waiting room full of people. I'm not suggesting that, but even that just quick little reminder that, hey, I was listening last time, I care, how was your vacation or what have you. So stay on track, but make sure that you connect every single visit, look them in the eyes, and connect on a personal level. Number 2, always get an update. What has changed? Anything I should know? And of course, this is important because you want them to feel heard. You also want to make sure that, I think doing this properly can maybe reinforce the fact that this is a process and that, this is going to be, X amount of time, if it's 6 months or a year, however long you've laid out for. This is a process, and I need to get an update to know where we are in this process today. Educate. So there's really 2 options here. This has been my weak point throughout practice is I get super focused on making, checking and adjusting, and my education process goes out the window. One of the reasons we created the email curriculum. So I find there's usually one of 2 different types of people that lie on the table, and how you educate them will differ depending on who they are. So person 1 is that person who's just yapping the whole time. Right? They've just got lots to share, very outgoing person, and lots of personal chatter that really is irrelevant to to their spine nerve system and why they're there. So this is probably this is definitely the more challenging to turn around. But there's a real skill here that needs to be really worked on, and that's that skill of turning any conversation into an opportunity to discuss chiropractic, discuss health, without sounding like a complete moron, because we've all heard that, you don't want to be that person. Oh, I was up at the cottage the other day. Oh, well, chiropractic really boosts your immune system. And they're like, what the heck are you talking about? So, there's a skill there where you can do that really naturally, and certainly that's going to take a lot of time and training. But option B is that person who is who's just very quiet and there's just silence there. And that's really when you have to really take control, and that's your opportunity to, share any information, and again, a natural, human way that is going to bring up some part of your curriculum. So step number 3 is really to educate. Step 4 is to recap, and I think this is super important as far as the sales process is concerned, because I think, again, you want to reinforce the fact that this is a process. And so what I like to do is I like to offer some specific spine and nerve system related a recap of what I've noticed that's different since last time, and I do so in context of the bigger picture and the bigger recommendations that I've given. So, for example, I noticed X, Y, and Z today. That's great considering what we saw in your structural radiographs. We saw this problem has been likely been with you for about 10 years. So this is just great considering how long this problem has been with you. Mm-hmm. We're right on track. Okay, so again, you're just reinforcing a lot of these really important principles that they need to understand to build retention. And of course, what you're doing is saying, okay, we're on track, but the next step is to get back, in on Thursday to make sure that we get your 3 visits in, so that we can continue to see progress in this process. And then number 5 is just confirming the next visit. Okay, so you want to connect, you want to get an update from them as to where they are in the process, you want to educate them based on the curriculum you've created, you want to offer a recap, and especially you want to offer it in the context of the bigger picture and the process that you've recommended to them, and then you always want to confirm their next visit. So that's the 5-step perfect visit template.
Yeah, I think those are great, Mike. I'm just looking at my whiteboard here as we're having this conversation, and it's pretty much all by different names, but all the same steps. The one thing that I would add to that, and this is just more of an overarching theme, way of being during your visits, and this is something I just reinforce consistently, is be relentless. This is the visit where you will fall off. These are the visits where you will give up. These are the days where it's so easy. You know, it's visit number 20, 30, 50, 80, 90, 100, depending on the volume in your practice. And it's so easy to just let one go and let one go. And then that becomes 5 and 10. And all of a sudden, you know, you've dropped this whole process entirely. Be relentless. The best doctors in the world, the best clinicians in the world, and the best marketers in the world, for that sense, are relentless every single visit, every single time. And that's the power of having a template. It's something that, you know, you can pull the trigger and flip the switch, and you know that you're going to go through step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And as you get better at it and your skill improves, your ability to, you know, wander around within those steps and be able to have conversations like a human being, that stuff's going to increase and improve drastically over time. But just be relentless. Leads us to number 3 and the final one, Mike, and another one that goes overlooked, which is our topic for today, 3 most overlooked areas that could cost you a lot. And you think about the ones we picked today, I think it's interesting that, you know, if you were to map out the, you know, I guess revenue gain and loss, I know it's difficult to maybe do that, but you look at something like the first call, you know, if they don't start, then there's 0. If they don't continue through the daily visit. And I think of the annuals, you know, those are the big moments where we're getting new agreements going forward into the next stage of care. So in my lifetime care map, I know yours is probably similar, there's a correct and rebuild phase, and those phases may be different time frames. But once I get through those, I'm generally giving annual recommendations for people. And, you know, we see people range anywhere from checkups every 5 days to every 30 days, just depends on their goals and on their test results. But essentially, we then do annual testing with them and then follow up with the annual testing. We go through and actually get a new agreement. So let me walk you through the 3 steps that we use, and Mike, I'll let you add in as we go. So number 1 is, you know, you're selling them on the next year. You're selling them on the next stage of care. You're not assuming, both on the daily visit and then on the annuals, that it's a go. Yes, we definitely see in a retention-based practice, you're going to see a high percentage of conversions on these. But the reason those conversions are strong are because what happens on your daily visit and then what you're doing on these annual reviews. So we like to give a succinct summary. I know, Mike, you did a good job of this in the pre-show here. Why don't you give people just a real brief description of what a succinct summary might include?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I have like a template, and I probably sound like a robot when I go through it, but it's something that I've created. Again, it's a strategy that I use, that I've worked on and edited and changed and tweaked over the years. And so I found something now that I really, really, really like. So yeah, just very succinctly here, I start with, really it comes back to your curriculum, right? That's right. Just as an aside here, how do you determine what to share during this annual review? Well, essentially, you should go back to your curriculum, and you shouldn't assume that just because you shared this information, just because they got your email curriculum last year or 2 years ago or 5 years ago, that they remember all that. These are new, challenging concepts, some of them, and so they constantly need to be reiterated. So I essentially just go through that curriculum, and I've picked out the most important items on there, and that's just I've worked them in some way, shape, or form, throughout this. It doesn't take maybe 3 to 5 minutes at the most. This is a very short visit, so it has to be very succinct and very on point. And so, what I do is just remind them of the objectives of their care. I remind them that the whole point is to have a healthy spine and nerve system. I start to remind them of of exactly kind of where they're at and kind of the progress that they've seen over the last year. I always trying to, again, bring in some of these key principles, like, how you feel is not a good measure of your health. I talk about, what happens and what kind of the gold standard is as far as, the structure itself, what we're looking for. So again, that they can take their results over the last year and compare them. So don't just assume that they remember what all these tests mean. And so really just, doing all that in a very succinct, eloquent way,
right,
and then all of that just bringing them to the point where you're setting new goals for them for the upcoming year, and then, as you said, getting a new agreement. So really just re-educating, sharing your feedback, my feedback about where they are as compared to the year before, the things I've noticed, both good and bad, and then identifying with them, with their help, with their support, helping them set new goals for the upcoming year, and getting an agreement that we're going to be a part of this process, and getting a clear agreement as to, again, just like in the beginning, what are their responsibilities going to be, and what is my role going to be in that. So, in a nutshell, those are the types of things that I think are really important. But I think you said it best at the end of the daily visit, is that don't just assume that they remember all these things. Don't just take for granted that because they've been here for 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, that they're going to be here for year 6. You've got to go back and constantly be reminding them of all of the reasons that they've been with you that long. And I think, of course, that'll differ depending on where they are in the process. But don't take for granted that they're going to continue. Don't take for granted that they're going to come for the next visit. Have a plan, and lay that plan out, and really not just have a plan, but work on it, train on it, improve upon it. And it's something that you've really got to work at if you really want to truly build that retention-based practice.
Yeah, this is one of those areas, the reason why we included it in here as an overlooked area, because number one, a lot of people don't do these. They don't do annual examinations. As I see a lot of referrals in from other chiropractic practices, and it's amazing how on day 1 or 2, I'll be going over tests we're going to do or have done, and say, oh, I had that test done at so-and-so's office. Say, oh, that's great. That's really wonderful. What did your test results look like when it was done again? It was never done again. And it's so common. And I think what happens is you get into practice, you get comfortable, you have enough new people coming in to support the volume and profits that you want, and you just forget about all the things that are going to allow you to build an exceptional business. And doing these annual examinations is one of them. Think about things that you've done, that you've bought into over and over again. So even fitness for me, training, I know the same for you, Mike. Yes, I've made that decision. It's something I'm going to do forever. But there are times where I fall off, and having somebody coach with me or having somebody design my own programming, those are things that really help me stay on track. So think about yourself as an expert in an area. You still need that. I still get my tests done, right? Every 6 months. I'm doing all my biostructural testing. I'm calculating our biostructural score. Some people use a core score. We've created our own scoring system. So do them. Be relentless with them. Don't skip steps, because even though Mike went through a very succinct process, it doesn't have to be long. You have to hit all the points. And that's where training comes in. Obviously, this podcast is too short to go into the training component, but there needs to be all these points along the way, with the end result is getting that strong agreement. The second piece that we use in the annuals is a checklist. And depending on your core product, how you want to map this out, you could create your own checklist. We've created the Life by Design checklist that we use at Life by Design. The nice thing about the checklist is it allows people to identify other things that need to be done, their requirements, and whether they're doing them or not, and to what degree they're doing them. As a side note, one of the best things about the checklist is it reminds people that their results with their spine and nervous system are not entirely dependent on the checkup and correction schedule. They're not entirely dependent on you. They're also dependent on other factors. And so if they're checking off on their checklist that they're not doing the other factors, then it looks good on you in the sense that, wow, this chiropractor's done his or her job. The results I am getting are probably entirely due to them. Imagine if I was doing these other things. The other nice thing that it does is it allows you, when we go back to the concept here of selling, there's sales opportunities there. So my suggestion is have a checklist that's built around your core product, and your core product may have ancillary components. So in ours, we have fish oil, vitamin D, and probiotics. We have some grain-free greens product, and we have a grass-fed whey protein. We also have a mobility kit. We also have the Fit Club, and Mike has CrossFit 613, so we have a gym or a training facility. By people checking off on the checklist what they're doing and not doing, and still having goals that they marked off on their intake forms, things like, or in their progress examination forms, like I want to lose weight, or I want to get more fit. There's a great opportunity to sell them into that next step. One, there's a benefit for them because they're going to get better results in their general health. Also going to get better results in their biostructural care, their spine and nervous system care. And then, of course, the benefit to you is you've now either increased your profits or you've increased the number of prospects into a different portion of your business, as in Mike and I. And the last piece is referrals. It's a great opportunity for referrals at these annual examinations and reviews. On the form, we have an area where people actually write in people that they feel like should be under care, people that they feel like we can help. We call ours the My 5 list, and people can choose up to 5 people who are, like a cell phone plan. And essentially the benefit to them, we tell them, is that, they get to move up the list to the next available new slot, and there'll be a gift waiting for them when they're here. So the bonus is, something in exchange for this practice member just being a great practice member. And it gives me a chance at the review to follow up with them. It could be with a letter, it could be with a verbal conversation, or in our case, it's with both. So I find this is a great opportunity for referrals at these annual examinations. So Mike, anything you want to add with annuals, or anything you want to add with any of the 3 we talked about today?
No, I think just most importantly, you need to have a sales process, a sales strategy we've come up with 10. We've come up with 10 different areas of your practice, 10 different points along your lifetime care map that require a sales strategy. And not only do you need a sales strategy, but once you've got that strategy, you need to train on it. You need to train yourself, and you need to train your team. And in order to really build that retention-based practice, don't fall into that mindset that so many chiropractors do, where once they've committed, agreed to care, after day 2, that the sales process stops. It's got to continue, and that's where we come up with these 3 today. Like I said, there's 10 in total, but these 3 today, I think, in my experience anyway, are 3 that most docs are overlooking, and I think because of it, they're leaving a lot on the table.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And guys, we are not going to leave you hanging, because you're probably wondering, so what are these other 7? We could do a download, but instead we decided to crank it up a notch for you and give you a really nice freebie, and that's going to be a webinar. So we'll cover the other 7 on the webinar. It's going to be Thursday, August 10th, 8 p.m. You'll see the link here in the show notes. So go and register. We don't do replays, so make sure you're on there live. Thursday, 8 p.m., August 10th. We hope you guys will join us. I'm not exactly sure how many people the platform holds. Mike, I don't know if you can answer that question any better, but point is, get on there.
Yeah, it's 100. We learned last time that I told everyone it was 1,000, and then we had over 100, and I looked silly. So it's actually 100. That's just that's what we pay for on GoToWebinar. So it's 100 is our cap, and if experience says anything, we will overbook.
Okay, so make sure you're in the first 100 if you want to get on there. As I said, we don't play replays, and don't send me an email that says, "Will you do a replay?" Because we usually get those too, and we don't do replays. So if you can get on there, Thursday, August the 10th, 8 p.m., see you guys there. And thank you guys for listening. Life by Design for Chiropractors, the voice of reason in chiropractic.